Hey, Happy New Year! It's a brand new year and I've got a brand new series for you. If you're a fan of my Memories of the San Fernando Valley videos, then there's a good chance that you're going to enjoy this series as well. Like my Memories of the San Fernando Valley videos, we'll be driving around, checking out locations that I remember from the 80s and 90s, except for we won't be confined to the San Fernando Valley. We'll be able to drive all around Los Angeles and check out locations. Now, if you are a fan of my Memories of the San Fernando Valley videos, don't worry, those aren't done. I'm just going to be alternating between the Valley videos and the LA videos, but there's still lots of San Fernando Valley videos on the way. So I thought it might be kind of cool to start off the Memories of Los Angeles videos by checking out old music venues. Now I can tell you right off the bat, we're not going to be looking at every single music venue that was ever in Los Angeles because there was just way too many of them. Plus, I've already shown a lot of them in my Valley videos, like the Palomino or FM station, so we won't be looking at those again. There's also a really good chance that this video is going to get split into two because there's so much to see. So, let's go see what we can find. There's a building coming up on the right side of the freeway that I definitely remember passing by all throughout my childhood. It was a very noticeable building, and it was this one right here. I'm sure some of you remember. This used to be the Hollywood Tropicana. Now this is probably as close as I've ever been to this building. I was never old enough to actually go to the Tropicana, so I only ever saw it from the freeway when we were on our way to or coming home from my dad's work. But this is where the Hollywood Tropicana used to be, and this was the place to go for female mud wrestling. And if you lived in Los Angeles, you probably also remember those really cheesy TV commercials.
Ready for a close encounter you may not be able to handle. Female mud wrestling and oil wrestling at the world-famous Hollywood Tropicana. Female mud wrestling and oil wrestling, an outrageous evening of fun 7 nights a week, located at 1250 Northwestern Avenue in Hollywood. Try something unique, the Hollywood Tropicana.
Now, from what I know, they lost their liquor license, business continued to get worse, and they eventually had to shut the doors. I can only imagine how much crazy stuff went on here in the 80s. Now, I thought a cool place to start this off would be right here on the Sunset Strip, where there's so much to see in just a couple of blocks, like this very famous building right here behind me, the world famous Whiskey A Go-Go. Now, not only did I play my very first big show here at the Whiskey, and of course I've seen lots of shows here at the Whiskey, but later in the 90s I also ended up working here. Right up there on the second floor, actually right there, that was my office window. I sat at a desk up there all day talking to bands. I was a concert promoter, so basically I would just be calling bands all day, booking shows, and when it came to shows that we worked on, we also had to work at the club that night, so I also spent a lot of time right here inside this box office. Now, of course, besides my experiences here at the Whiskey, there is a ton of history with this building, so much so that we would need an entire video just to talk about it. Of course, countless bands have played here, everyone from the Doors to the Ramones, the Go-Go's, I mean, almost anybody you can think of. This gas station right across the street, at the time, this was an Arco, and we used to walk across the street a lot to get lunch from here. My boss would hand me a $20 bill and send me across the street to get hamburgers and hot dogs and corn dogs. We didn't eat very well back then. Across the street on the opposite corner, at the time that I worked here, this was Oz. But if we go back to the 80s and 70s, this was the famous Southern California record store, Licorice Pizza. And I definitely find it funny that we're down here talking about what the Sunset Strip was like in the 1980s, and if we look at the marquee of the Whiskey A Go-Go, Faster Pussycat's performing tonight. Right next to the Whiskey used to be Duke's Coffee Shop, another place that we used to grab lunch from. I remember going down there on occasion to grab a burger and fries. And right next to that was the Cat Club, a music venue that was famous for having celebrity jam sessions, and it was owned by Slim Jim Phantom from the Stray Cats. Now we're moving west down the Sunset Strip. This used to be the Hustler store. It just closed recently, and they're apparently going to be tearing it down to build more apartment buildings. We used to come here a lot late at night because they had a cafe that had a really good peanut butter and chocolate smoothie. Right up the street from the Whiskey, we have the Roxy Theater, another place that I've played at many times and seen numerous shows, everybody from Prince to Too Short to Bad Religion and everyone in between. Now at the time when I worked at the Whiskey, Roxy, and Rainbow were all owned by the same person, so we did a lot of shows at the Roxy as well, so I also spent a lot of time inside this box office. The Roxy Theater was also featured in Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, but we'll save that for another video. Right next door to the Roxy Theater is the world famous Rainbow Bar and Grill, an extremely famous restaurant, especially in the 1980s. During the hair metal and glam rock scene, everybody hung out at the Rainbow. There was even a couple of Guns N' Roses music videos filmed here at the Rainbow. On the very next block was another extremely famous club from the late 60s to the early 90s. This was Gazaris. Gazaris was another venue that at some point everybody played at. The Doors had a residency here, Van Halen had a residency here. Throughout the 80s, Gazaris was a major hotspot for the glam rock scene. It also played a major role in the decline of Western civilization Part 2, the metal years. From the front door of Gazaris down to the Roxy, this entire stretch of sidewalk is where all the bands would be out here passing out flyers and promoting themselves. Any night of the week you could find Guns N' Roses, Warrant, Poison, they were all out here. In the early 90s, after the owner passed away, Gazaris was torn down and they built this structure that you currently see. It was originally Billboard Live, and that's where the Ramones were supposed to play their final gig, but that ended up getting moved to the Hollywood Palace. Billboard Live was only here for a couple of years, and then it turned into the Key Club. Now the Key Club is one of the few venues around here that I was never lucky enough to play at, but I did see a lot of shows here. Everything from Gwar to Fear to Slick Rick to the 5, 6, 7, 8s. I had a lot of good times here at the Key Club. The Key Club eventually shut down and it's been one oak ever since. Now for anyone that used to go to a lot of shows around here in like the late 90s, does anybody remember right here in front of what used to be Bank of America, there was a homeless guy that kind of looked like Santa Claus, and he would always be sitting out here playing a Casio keyboard, and he had a couple of pet mice. Just curious if anyone else remembers him. Just about a block the other side of the Whiskey is another very famous club. Now this has been many different clubs over the years, Filthy McNasty's, the Central, and tons of clubs before that, but it's probably most famously now known as the Viper Room. It opened as the Viper Room in the 1980s and was partially owned by actor Johnny Depp, and famously right here on the sidewalk in front of the club is where actor River Phoenix passed away. Supposedly they're going to be tearing down this entire block, including the Viper Room, so that they can build more apartment buildings. Now so far nothing's been torn down, but unfortunately I have a feeling it's going to happen. Right here on this corner where Chase Bank now is, this used to be Tower Video. And of course right across the street was the world famous Sunset Tower Records. I used to walk down here a lot on my lunch break to look through CDs. A lot of crazy stuff happened here at this Tower Records. Prince played an in-store here. Elton John performed in the parking lot. I remember coming here to see Weezer play inside this store. Lots of cool memories at this Tower Records. After Tower Records closed, it was purchased by Gibson and was supposedly going to become some type of a music venue, but that never happened, and they redressed it as Tower Records. I believe that was when the Tower Records documentary came out, and that was supposed to just be temporary, but it's been this way ever since, and I've kind of just got used to it being this way, and I know that one day it's not going to be like this anymore, and that makes me really sad. I had to mention really quick, right across the street from Tower Records used to be another restaurant that I used to love to eat at when I worked at the Whiskey. It was called T&T, but we called it the Greek Spot. T&T was so good. I used to go there probably at least once a week. Really great gyros and also really great personal pizzas. This right here used to be the Coconut Teaser, another club that was extremely popular with the hair metal and glam rock scene. But by the mid-90s, glam rock started to die out, so they started doing punk shows and pretty much anything else. This was one of the other few clubs around here that I was never lucky enough to play at. I know we got close a couple of times, but it never did happen. Somewhere right here on 4th Street off of Boylston used to be the Peace and Justice Center. And if my memory serves correctly, it used to be right here. This entire block is now Los Angeles Center Studios. but I'm pretty sure right here is where Peace and Justice Center used to be. It was a community center that had punk rock shows. Well, they had more than punk rock shows, but of course that's why we came here. And in the front they had a little skate park, and then inside the building is where they had the shows. And yeah, it was a cool little community center, and unfortunately it's no longer here. Right over here on the corner, this used to be where the AntiClub was. This was another favorite place to play. I just remember always thinking it looked so cool in there. The club had a really cool layout, and yeah, it was just a fun place to play. Now at the time that we were playing here, the club was ran by a lady named Ren, and her mom was always hanging out at the shows as well. And I remember if kids would get too crazy in the audience, her mom would come out and start yelling at all of the kids in the crowd. Now the rumor always is they were the family of actress E.G. Daily, but I don't know if there's any truth to that. The AntiClub was actually shut down and torn down years ago. There was another building here in this spot after the AntiClub, but it looks like that's been torn down as well, and they're now building, you guessed it, more apartment buildings. This building right here on the corner, this used to be Dizzy Debbie, and Dizzy Debbie actually would have been a pretty fun club to play at, except for it was owned by an older Asian lady, and kind of like the AntiClub, she didn't like it when kids would slam dance, but she would actually come out from behind the bar with a pool stick and try and hit the kids to stop them from slam dancing. She was actually really strict about who played at her venue. I remember before I was able to book a show, I had to come down here and have a formal meeting with her. But besides all that, it was still a cool venue. I enjoyed playing here, and it was kind of funny watching her come out from behind the bar with the pool cue. Where this jiu-jitsu place now is, this used to be a venue called Frogs, and I believe I played here just one time. I also believe that was my first time ever coming to the South Bay. I remember getting in the car, leaving Reseda, getting on the 405, and driving forever. It felt like we were going to another state. Like I said, it was my first time coming to the South Bay, and it just felt like it was so far away. Now, I don't remember what the exact reason was, but I remember the inside of Frogs was soaking wet, and it smelled really bad. They had carpet, and I mean, it was really wet, like our feet were squishing on the carpet when we were walking around the building. And I remember just thinking that we were definitely gonna all get electrocuted and die on stage that night, but we survived, even though it smelled really bad, and I don't think there were too many people at the show. This used to be the Alligator Lounge, and I don't remember a lot about the Alligator Lounge. I know I played here at least once, and I remember it being a really nice place with a really nice stage, and I feel like they used to do a lot of ska shows. I don't know, I could be remembering that wrong, but that's what I remember. Something to keep in mind is back then, a lot of venues didn't want to have anything to do with punk music, so doing ska shows was a good way to avoid doing punk shows. I remember there was a lot of venues that when I would call to book shows, I would have to try and tone it down and say that we were a rock band or, you know, whatever, anything just to avoid using the word punk. This building right here behind me, this was one of my favorite places to play in the 90s. This is the former location of the Natural Fudge. Now, I might be exaggerating, but I always felt like the Natural Fudge was our version of CBGB's. It was a small hole in the wall that was covered in graffiti and stickers. It smelled really bad, but there was always a good crowd, and it was always a fun place to play. The Natural Fudge started out as a small, hippie vegetarian restaurant. They started doing comedy and open mic. Eventually, they started having live music, and by the mid-90s, they were having punk shows almost every night of the week. Now, the Natural Fudge had been here for a really long time, but what ended up happening was a new neighbor moved in to one of the surrounding apartment buildings. She didn't like having all the people hanging out in front of her place, urinating and drinking and being loud, so she began to call the police and complain to the city constantly, and eventually the Natural Fudge was shut down for not having the proper permits. The Natural Fudge was owned and operated by a lady named Brenda Roberts, who was always really nice to the bands, and even after the Fudge closed down, she kept in contact with a lot of us. She told us she would eventually open a new venue, and I remember for a while she was even holding shows in her backyard just because she wanted to give us a place to play. I really miss the Natural Fudge. It was a really fun place to play. I made a lot of friends there. Some of them I'm still friends with. Jimmy and Gary, I'm looking at you. Years after the Natural Fudge closed down, my friend Gary had Natural Fudge Night at the Cobalt Cafe. He got a lot of the same bands that used to play together to play at the Cobalt. He even got Brenda Roberts to host it. It wasn't the same, but it was still a cool reunion, and maybe we can do it again someday. So this entire building, this was the Natural Fudge, but it seems like they've now split it into two separate buildings. This side right here, this is the front door that you would enter through. You would enter this door, and then there was a bar where you would pay your entrance fee, and behind that was a kitchen. Not really sure why they had a kitchen. They did always advertise that they had corn dogs for sale, but I know I personally never saw anybody eating anything from the Natural Fudge. After you paid your entrance fee, you would hang a right and you would go into the main part of the venue. This side of the building where it says Market, that was the main part of the club. The stage was right here up against the wall, so basically the bands would be standing with their backs up against where these windows and door are now. I was kind of hoping that I would be able to go into the market and take a look around and see what it looks like now, but I peeked through the window and it seems like this market is closed down. It's just full of stuff and it looks like they're just using it as storage now. Well, we're just about out of time, but there's still so many music venues to look at. So that's why you got to join me for episode 2 of Memories of Los Angeles, which will be part 2 of checking out music venues in LA. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing that now. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.